Hey everybody, how you doing? Good, good. We're excited to be here. I love coming out and meeting students and people that are out on the ground actually doing the work. I mean, that's why all of us do what we do at Alliance Defending Freedom is really so that you can, one, express your rights on campus, was what I do, and two, so that we can protect life. And that's kind of what Eric and Gabby are going to talk about. But so we're talking, the name of this panel, right, is Don't Let Life Get Canceled. And so we're going to talk in three different kind of aspects of different work that we're doing at ADF and where we're seeing problems with being able to articulate a pro-life perspective. And I'm the director of the Center for Academic Freedom, so my team defends students and faculty at public universities and K-12 schools so that you can freely exercise your First Amendment rights. And we know that on our campuses, the pro-life message is not exactly welcomed with open arms, right? And so one way that they try to cancel the pro-life message is through all the regulations that K-12 schools and public universities do to try to censor your First Amendment rights. And what I'm going to do is talk about the ways they do that, the ways that we help Students for Life groups on campus push back on these regulations. We've been representing Students for Life groups for a very long time at ADF. We've been partnering with Students for Life since the beginning, and I really love representing Students for Life members and groups because they passionately believe in this cause, and they're doing this work at great cost, not only from a time perspective, but from a all of the pushback they get from not only colleges themselves, but from the students. So I'm going to just kind of use my time to talk about some of the cases and the ways that schools push back. Primarily going to focus on public universities. K-12 schools do some things as well, but it's a little bit different. I'll be happy to answer any questions about those, but primarily going to talk about public universities. This doesn't apply to private universities. The First Amendment doesn't restrict the rights of private universities, so this is all public university stuff. So what's one primary way that they try to cancel life or to infringe on your rights is through restrictions like speech zones. Thankfully, those are fewer and far between now because of a lot of the work that we've done, but we still see them from time to time. And a speech zone basically is just an area in an outdoor area of campus where the school says, yeah, we love First Amendment rights. We love what, we really value them. Go speak in this little 12 by 12 space and don't get out of it or you're going to get arrested. That's kind of what a speech zone is, right? And we've seen a lot of those over the years. Thankfully, again, many of them are taking those away, but I'll give you a couple examples of things we push back there. So in one case, we represented a Students for Life group at Chemeketa Community College, and they were out there. They wanted to go out and just hand out pamphlets on campus. So they got ready to start doing it, and they were told, hey, you can't do that. And they're like, well, why not? Well, we have a speech zone, and you've got to stay in this speech zone. So as we did some research on it, we found out this was a 100-acre campus, and they had a zone which limited the ability to pass out flyers to 1.5% of that campus. All right, so this little small area, they're like, yeah, you can exercise your First Amendment rights in this little bubble here, right? We challenged that. We filed a lawsuit, and they eventually changed that policy, and now the Students for Life group and every student group on campus can now use the entire campus for expressing their message and doing it in a peaceful way, and that's how it should be. Another one of my favorite ones, and actually you can go talk to the girl that was involved with this because she now works for ADF, but her name was Bernadette Tazy, and she was running the Students for Life group at Fresno State University. And they, at Fresno State, they had the ability, they wanted to chalk messages to pregnant women on campus that, hey, there's resources on campus. And so they got permission. They went through the right process to get permission to chalk messages on campus. And it was like, innocuous things like, hey, pregnant, need help, call this number, right? So after they get done doing it, they see these girls like wiping it out. And then they see this guy with them, and they're like, hey, what are you doing? And they get their phone out, And he's like, well, we're wiping this out. And they're like, why? Well, you can't be here. You're supposed to do this in this speech zone. And they're like, no, we have permission to do this. And he's like, this professor had let the class out and said, let's go wipe these messages out. Literally told their class to go out and wipe it out. And Bernadette, thankfully, got it all on video. You can go watch it on the Students for Life website. It's an amazing video. She films him doing this, and he's like, I'm totally for your First Amendment rights if you exercise your First Amendment rights in the speech zone, which didn't exist, actually. They didn't have a speech zone on campus, but he thought they did, and he thought that they could make them do that. She filmed him. We sued him. He paid us a lot of money. It was really fun. And we got, my favorite part of that, though, was part of the settlement was he had to go through 2 hours of First Amendment training with one of our very own attorneys, Travis Barham. And Travis is one of the most pedantic guys that you'll ever meet. And so he made it extremely painful, and it's wonderful. And sometimes when I need a pick-me-up, I just go watch that training, and I watch the vein on Professor Thatcher's head get bigger and bigger throughout. So anyways, that's the speech zones. Another one you might encounter is a speech code. Now, speech zones are like, hey, you can only speak in this little area, or you have all these regulations in outdoor areas. Speech codes are more about what you can say, not where you can say it, but what you can say. They say, hey, you can't engage in that speech because it's harmful, or it's discriminatory, or it's whatever it is, right? And most schools have some form of code like this, and they use it to suppress speech they don't like. The problem with it is it's very arbitrary, and grants a lot of discretion to college officials, and allows them to say, hey, you can say that, but you can't say that. And so one example of that is at University of Miami University of Ohio. We represented a Students for Life group there. They wanted to do the Cemetery of the Innocents project. So they reserved an area, they put up the crosses, and everything was great until the school came and said, oh, you need to put trigger warnings around this so that people don't have to see these crosses in the ground. They might be triggered. Like, have you ever driven past a cemetery? Like, I'm not even sure, whatever. But anyways, they told him they're done. She's like, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to put up a trigger warning because you can't force us, you can't compel us to say that somehow this is going to be offensive or whatever. And so we sued them, and we won that case as well. And they had to change their policy to say that you can't force people to say something that they don't want to say, to express a message that they don't want to say, or you can't tell them that they can't say that simply because other people might be offended. So you have speech codes, speech zones. You also have the student fee policies. So you guys all probably know if you're in school, you not only pay tuition, but you also pay a lot of fees, right? And many of these fees go to fund student organizations. That sounds like a great thing, and it is a good thing. You can use these to put on events. The problem is that student governments use them to give them to their favored programs and not to others, and pro-life groups are not their favored programs. So I'll give you an example of that. We represented Nathan Apodaca and the Students for Life group at Cal State San Marcos. And all he wanted to do was get $500 to bring a pro-life speaker to campus. So he went and made the application. They denied it. And he said, why'd you deny it? Well, we don't pay for outside speakers. He said, well, that's weird because the Gender Equity Center and the Pride Center bring in outside speakers all the time, and they're funded by student fees. And yeah, but they're different. And so we went and researched it, and we figured out how different they were. Cal State San Marcos brought in $2.1 million a year in student fees. And they gave about $350,000 a year to the Gender Equity Center and the Pride Center. The other 100 student groups got a total of $5,000 together as a group. So $300,000 for two groups, $5,000 for the rest. Well, the Supreme Court has said that you can charge student fees. You can compel students to pay student fees to fund speech only if it's viewpoint neutral, only if you allocate it in a way that everybody gets to speak their message. That's not viewpoint neutral to give two groups $300,000 and to give the other 100 groups $5,000 and say, hey, go fight for it, right? So we sued them, and we sued the whole Cal State system. Cal State system is the largest university system in the nation. It's got about 25 campuses. They bring in over $50 million a year in student fees total on that. And we won. We changed the entire student fee system so that everybody now has the ability to get those fees on a viewpoint neutral basis. So if you're in that system and you're not getting that, come see me afterwards. We'll sue them again. So security fees, student fees, that's another one. One other one you guys have run into if you've done any events are security fees. So what they like to do is say, okay, you can have your event. Maybe we'll even fund your event. But you're going to have to pay a lot of money for fees because there's some crazy leftists on campus that are going to come and assault you, and you got to pay us to protect you, right? And we're like, well, wait, I mean, why should we have to pay because these people want to break the law? I'm not sure that that's constitutional. It's not. It's a viewpoint neutral it's a viewpoint discriminatory policy because it's making you pay something more, pay for your speech because other people disagree with it. So we've challenged a lot of those security fee policies. If they are charging you and they're not charging other groups just because they protest your groups, that's unconstitutional. Come talk to us. We'll help you with that. They can't do that. Then the final way that they do it is through student recognition policies. So these student recognition policies, you've got this whole student organization system that they set up. They say, hey, you can become a student group here, but you have to go through this whole rigmarole where, and apply and all this stuff. Now, if they have an objective policy that says, hey, you have to fill out this application, you have to have 5 members, and applies to everybody, and their objective criteria, they can do that. That's fine. But what happens is many times they apply it in a way that they have this subjective policy where the student government has the ability to just say whether you're going to be a group, even if you've met the criteria. That's how many clubs, universities do it. And it's unconstitutional. They can't have like a popularity vote where like a majority of the student government says we don't like pro-life groups so you can't be here. You're paying fees just like everybody else. You have the ability to be a club just like everybody else, and they can't say we don't like you so you're not going to be here. And we see that a lot. We see there are the student governments enact policies that give them a lot of power, and they have the ability to just say, no, you're no longer going to be a group here. And we've had to push back on a lot of those policies. In general, again, they can have criteria for your student recognition policies, but they can't have subjective criteria, and they can't just say, hey, we'll tell you whether you're going to be approved or not. It has to be objective. So, fill out this application, pay this fee, and have 5 members. If they do that, they can, and that applies across the board, they can do that. But if they say, well, come talk to this one, bureaucrat and they'll tell you whether you're approved, they can't do that. That'd be unconstitutional. We'd challenge and we would win. One example, we sued Georgia Tech a while back when the student group wanted to bring in a speaker, Alveda King, and they were telling them, they told them a lot of things that, we're going to revoke your recognition, and you're going to pay security fees, and we're not going to give you funding for this because she's inherently religious, which we thought was interesting because it's like, well, that would mean that Dr. King himself wouldn't even be able to come here and speak on campus, because I'm pretty sure he's inherently religious himself, right? So, but that's the kind of thing that they do when they're not, pushed back on. So that's kind of a really, very, very quick overview of the types of things that schools will do. And in general, when you want to think about the constitutional parameters of what schools can do, especially like in the K through 12 context, they can apply criteria to you, but it has to be across the board. It has to be viewpoint neutral. They can't say, well, people aren't going to like your speech, so you can't do it, right? That's unconstitutional in any forum. So if they're doing things like that, come talk to us. We'd love to help you out. There are some things they can restrict. They can do more in a K through 12 school than they can on universities. But again, it has to be across the board criteria that applies to all groups. And they usually don't do that because they have their own favored groups, and they usually apply it more strongly to a pro-life club. So that's my spiel. That's what my group does. That's what we do on my team to kind of fight back and to not let life get canceled. I'm going to let Eric Baptist, my colleague who directs the Center for Life, talk about what they do.
Thank you very much, Tyson. Really appreciate that. And I always hate to go after you because you have so much energy. And then I'm like, oh, man. I'm Tyson's colleague. I'm always suited up and maybe less interesting, so we'll see what happens here. I'm the director and senior counsel for the ADF Center for Life, so I direct all our pro-life litigation and regulatory advocacy on that front, too. And so one thing what I want to share is we are concerned, I think, about the future of the medical profession in many ways. And so this panel, I forgot to tell you, is like kind of an evolution. Like, okay, Tyson deals with like, K through college essentially, and now you've graduated from college, and let's say you want to go to med school. Let's talk about the problems being a pro-life med student, resident, and the pressures you may face, because I think this is a concern for me personally, because I love to see pro-life doctors out there actually in the profession, but they're also are some of our best advocates on the life issues, because they're on the front lines in emergency rooms. They're there accompanying women who are pregnant, unplanned pregnancies, and they really can tell the stories. They can talk about the complications, and so we need pro-life doctors, in particular OBGYNs, out there in the field. But the medical, I would say the medical industry, the schools are trying to clamp down, I would say, on pro-life doctors, and that's something you need to be aware of. And also, come talk to us if you're having problems, or come talk to Tyson. Usually he's the best to talk to. But in terms of this, I want to highlight some of the concerns that are growing pressures on pro-life doctors. One, let's talk about med school. You're in med school and you're a pro-life doctor or med student. What is being applied to your school? There's something called the accreditation. I'm going to have to read it because I'm really bad with acronyms. The Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education, ACGME. And they impose requirements on graduate medical schools and programs. And if you're going to get accredited, and that's an important thing for whether it's a college, university, law school, and same with med schools, you have to have their accreditation. They're almost like a monopoly. And what they do is they pose certain requirements in schools. And what they have recently done now, they have stated that, this is their quote, access to experience with induced abortion must be part of residency education. And then they go on to say and explain that those programs must be structured such that residents may opt out rather than opt into this curriculum, education, and training. And then they say if you have a program without such specific family planning curriculum that includes direct procedural training in abortion, unless it is requested by and developed by a resident desiring training, is an opt-out curriculum, you're now in noncompliance and won't get accreditation. So unpacking that a little means that most schools, or almost all schools, are going to be an opt-out program. Let's say you're in the university. I'm going to go with a public school, of course. Let's go across the river to Maryland, or not. I was going to go to Virginia, but let's go to Maryland. It might be more likely there. So University of Maryland's medical school system. You're there. You're a pro-life student trying to, I'm a son of a pediatrician. My dad is actually still a professor at the University of Illinois, and so I know the pressures. I hear from him. He's like, we got to work really hard, and there's a lot of pressure. And only so many people get into med school, and then to get the residency you want and the fellowship, and then getting practice. I know it's tough. Being a lawyer is relatively easy compared to being a med student, right, or a doctor, in many ways. And the pressures are real. And so you're a med student fighting against the grain of this big university system in Maryland, let's say, and then say, okay, today we're going to go to Planned Parenthood. We're going to do the clinical there, and you're going to participate, watch, and help out with abortions. What do? Well, you're entitled, according to this accreditation program, and by law, I guess, in theory, to opt out. But what we have heard and seen is that when students try to opt out, like, I would like to opt out, like, you become a problem for the university and the med school. They're going to say, well, why do you want to opt out? Well, I have a religious objection to it. I think it's morally reprehensible to kill an unborn baby. Well, that's interesting. Don't you want to be a doctor? Yes, okay, well, isn't this part of the required training? And that's what they say? Yes, okay. Well, I'll take it up with the director of our program, see what happens. And then 10 days later, you're like, I'm missing class now. Or some feel compelled until they get that waiver to actually be allowed to opt out. They go to Planned Parenthood and watch and participate in these things. And talk about violating your conscience and searing in your conscience. So like that will haunt you for the rest of your career. Some doctors have had to go through that because of that pressure. So that is something that you have to think about. But also just know some students have taken a stance and say, no, I'm gonna be that thorn on your side. I'm gonna continue to not show up to class when we have clinicals in Planned Parenthood, and then fight it. But also knowing at the end of the day, they may commit, I would say, they may jeopardize their careers, let's say, because if you want to get a fellowship after your residency, you have to get a letter of recommendation. What director is going to want to write a letter of recommendation for you if you were a pain on their side and they just didn't see your worldview when it comes to abortion? Like, that's a problem. Again, that's what they have felt, and sometimes they feel coerced and compelled to participate in such a procedure and training because that's what the accrediting bodies say they have to do. So again, you have rights. There's a federal statute. So anytime you get government money, there's some strings attached to it, some good, some bad. It's called the Coates-Snow Amendment. It's a federal law, and it applies to any school program that receives federal government funds. And that's very helpful because it generally prohibits discrimination against a healthcare provider or entity or an individual doctor or student to engage in certain abortion-related training activities. So know that you do have rights, federal rights, that protect you, among other ones too. But again, there are real pressures, and we're thinking about like, well, by the opt-out versus opt-in, and I've heard it's easier, it's much better if you have to opt in, then it looks more voluntary. When you're opt-out, you have to go through more bureaucratic hurdles against a potentially hostile school. And then, say you survive all that, you go and become a practicing OBGYN. You made it through med school, you went to the right schools, they didn't put pressure on you, or you were able to opt out without problem, and you got a job. Well, now there's something called the American Board of Obstetrics and Gynecology, or we call ABOG. They have their own voluntary certification system, and they have certain requirements associated with it. What I've been told is if you want to have entry and have admitting privileges in certain hospitals, or to have insurance actually recognize you and reimburse you for the medical services you provide, you need an ABOG certification in OBGYN medicine. So, well, what have they said recently, especially in light of the Dobbs decision? The medical schools and the industry have really kind of ratchet up the pressure on doctors. So they always have it under the guise of voluntary. But now to get a certification or to maintain your status and have the certification, what do they say? Oh, well, you need to have knowledge, judgment, and skills in reproductive health care, including abortion, because that is essential to the practice of OBGYN. Oh, okay. And then they highlight certain things, like you must have at least 2 months of education and clinical experience in family planning. That includes abortion care. And then even further, it gets even worse in my mind, because they will say, oh, we will use our discretion and evaluate whether physicians should continue to have this certification if they fail to have the training and education. But also, I'll warn you, they say, if you spread intentional misinformation or disinformation about family planning and abortion, that is a violation of professionalism, standing, and professional conduct standards for continuing its certification as an OBGYN. Well, let me tell you, if you go to ABOG's website and see what they believe about abortion, if you think abortion is not healthcare, if you think it's damaging to women and definitely to the unborn lives, that may be arguably disinformation and misinformation in their worldview. And there have not been a few public threats to pro-life doctors who have testified in front of Congress, taken positions in litigation where they're being threatened. Nothing has happened yet, but they're being threatened like, hey, ABOG might pull your certification. That's disinformation. Chemical abortion safe. What are you talking about? There are no complications or significant ones. And that will be a problem one day. So I highlight these things because it is becoming increasingly difficult to practice medicine as a pro-life doctor. And that worries me personally. Again, I said that before, but as an advocate here on the pro-life side, especially in the world of ADF, and we work so closely with medical associations and pro-life medical associations and pro-life doctors, it's very difficult to have those voices. There are courageous voices out there, but they're fewer and fewer, and a lot of people just want to keep their head down and not say a word. But we need those voices. We need those good doctors here. So I think I just want to finish with that and just kind of emphasize to you, you do have rights. Keep them in mind, and also think about if you have problems, come to us and talk to us about it, because we're happy to help. But it's an increasing concern of the cancellation of pro-life voices in the medical community. But it doesn't stop there. Let's say you're a successful OBGYN, and now you want to start publishing papers. Gabby, what happens then?
Thank you. That's a great segue. So I want to talk about a little bit scientific research and give you a couple of pretty hard examples of what we've been seeing, the trend that we've been seeing, just to continue on with this conversation. And most of as students in the world of scholarship, publication is key. If you want your research to have an impact, if you want it to be legitimized, you need to publish in a journal. And then which journal you publish in is also highly important. So we see this trend right now in scholarship, which obviously a lot of times leans very heavily to the left, where pro-life voices are being stifled in that academic space. And so, just to give you a little bit of a sense of kind of the landscape, we as practitioners find it very important when we are trying to support our claims in court, for example, to have empirical evidence behind us. Not always 100% necessary, but obviously very good to support your claims with numbers, with hard facts. And sometimes that includes things like, for chemical abortion, for instance, how many women are visiting an emergency department after taking mifepristone, which is the first chemical abortion drug in the 2-drug regimen, or how many women's babies, unborn lives, have been saved by administering progesterone after taking that first pill. So those are the kinds of things that we would love to have support in research studies and scientific studies. But you have this situation where, first, it's very difficult for pro-life voices to get funding to do those sorts of research projects. And also, there's an issue with ethics, right? You don't want to subject a pregnant woman population to a placebo test where you're, in essence, going to be condemning half of the population to be killing their babies because they only get the placebo, they don't get the actual treatment. So you have this dichotomy of, naturally it's very hard to get your hands on that sort of research and to conduct that research, but then you also have this problem of the backstop of these journals, which hold a large monopoly over the voices that are out there in scholarship and what kind of scholarship is out there. So I want to kind of, with that landscape and that ecosystem, take you back to November of 2023, or actually maybe I'll do September of 2023. We were litigating the case the FDA versus Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine, which is the case where our clients went up to the Supreme Court challenging the FDA's unlawful rollback of safety standards for women who were taking abortion drugs, chemical abortion drugs. And while the Supreme Court was considering whether to grant cert in that case, about 2 months after that, my math is correct this time, about 2 months after the Supreme Court received the briefings on that. And by the way, our clients had won at both the district court and were affirmed at the Fifth Circuit. We had cited certain studies by authors who were affiliated with the Charlotte Lozier Institute, which is a pro-life research organization, basically to help support our contentions that, mifepristone harms women and sends them to the emergency room with severe complications. While the Supreme Court was considering whether to grant cert, and while that was also, one of the studies was in front of them as well, in our cross-petition, conditional cross-petition for cert, the authors of those studies received a notice by the publication, by Sage Publications is the journal name, that their studies were going to be retracted. And for a researcher, that's a big word. It's not a word you want to hear. Retracted basically means that there's something at issue with your study, either ethically speaking or with the study design, that warrants it being depublished by the journal. And the notice of retraction gave several reasons why they were going to retract these studies. And one of the reasons was, we think that we have concerns, quote unquote concerns, that there are issues with the study design. As the authors pointed out to them in their response, which, by the way, they were given 3 days to respond. They did receive an extension, but that was the first instance they gave them only 3 days to respond to these very critical allegations. They said, our study design, there was nothing wrong with it when we went through the evaluation process for this study or these studies to be published by the journal. And this was a post hoc review of the articles after the fact by an authority that we had no information on. And then in their response, they were able to dispel any notion that there was anything wrong with the study design, and they gave a point-by-point reiteration of this is why our data is correct. One of the other reasons was, we also think, this is Sage Journals, we also think that you failed to disclose a vital conflict of interest, i.e. your affiliation with a pro-life organization, CLI, the Charlotte Lozier Institute. The authors responded to that allegation as well, and they said, it's very clear that we are authors affiliated with the Charlotte Lozier Institute. We did disclose that when we were trying to get these articles published. And beyond that, you also publish Guttmacher Institute all over your journal, and they do not disclose ideological conflicts of interest on any of their articles. Why do we have to be the ones to disclose? So Guttmacher Institute is a very pro-choice research institution. So it's essentially like a CLI from the other side. Pretty much it's like the opposite. And they didn't have to disclose their ideological conflicts of interest. So why do we have to disclose ours? And the third allegation was, there's this double-blind peer review process that we go through to evaluate whether your article, meets the standards to be published. there was an allegation in there as well that they somehow had interfered with that process, even though Sage Publications was the only one who had control over who was reviewing what article, whether there was anonymity there. And so in their response, they addressed that as well. Very tellingly, the Sage Publications never actually engaged with the authors on the actual science of their articles that they were, or their journal entries that they were citing at issue. But nevertheless, they still retracted those articles. And you can actually find all of this, the responses back and forth with the publication, as well as the studies themselves on, it's called assaultonscience.org or .com. I can't remember if it's probably a .org, and they have all of them up there. But now these articles have the stain of retraction on them. And all the while, the only way to dispute the process that Sage had gone through in this instance would be to arbitrate. And that's supposed to be a very quick process. It's supposed to be more efficient than going to the courts. But it's been almost a year now since the authors initiated that arbitration process, and they still haven't even chosen an arbitrator. So all the while you have these studies which were done well and which are great for supporting the claims, especially that we had made in FDA versus AHM. They are marked with the stain of retraction and are now having to be published on a separate website that is not a journal, which of course is what you want your scholarship to be featured on. So that's kind of the scientific research element there. And it's important to note too that the reason why we're seeing these sorts of things going on is the science is now on our side, right? So the only way to get pro-life voices in the sciences silenced is to try to censor them. So I think that is, it's a positive, just directionally, that we have the science on our side, but certainly it's a place where pro-life voices, they're trying to cancel pro-life voices. So that's that element. Putting that aside and kind of switching gears completely, another big part of at least Eric and my practice is, and I should mention, I'm also in the Center for Life as counsel, and I get to work under Eric every day. He has to see my face. But we work a lot with pregnancy resource centers, and that's probably one of our biggest kind of clump of cases that we have right now. And we are seeing a lot of censorship and targeting and harassment of pro-life pregnancy centers because of their speech. And I'm going to focus on a very narrow issue because I could probably talk about PRCs all day, but their speech on what's called abortion pill reversal. And I don't know if y'all are familiar with that, but what essentially it is another name for it could be, supplemental progesterone or progesterone treatment. It's when a woman has taken the first chemical abortion drug, mifepristone, and she decides that I don't want to go through with this abortion. I want to have my baby. I want to save my baby's life. She has the option of taking supplemental progesterone, which is a hormone that the woman's body makes throughout pregnancy to sustain her pregnancy. And she can attempt to take that in order to combat the life-ending effects of the mifepristone in her system. And there's studies out there that show that it's successful between 64 to 68% of the time, and that there have been 5,000 plus babies that have been saved. 6,000 plus? That was a number from last year, so I'm sure it's grown. Yes, it is an incredible thing. And of course, pregnancy resource centers are going to want to tell women about this life-saving option, especially women who do not want to continue with their abortions. They want to save their children. But we see, and I'll give an example, in New York, we're litigating a case right now called NIFLA versus James. Letitia James is the attorney general there. She has attempted to censor pro-life voices in her state by going after pregnancy resource centers for their speech on abortion pill reversal. And she's done that using her Consumer Protection Authority. So we're seeing this happening across the United States and other states like New Jersey, in Washington, in California, where attorneys general are using their Consumer Protection Authority, which is extremely broad, to go after either the speech of pregnancy resource centers directly, or they're trying to go after information from pregnancy resource centers, trying to get large swaths of information that essentially will chill the speech and chill the activities of these pregnancy resource centers. And one of the ways that they're going after that in New York in particular is by their speech about abortion pill reversal. They're saying, well, there's not enough studies. That's how that ties in there. There's not enough studies on the efficacy of abortion pill reversal, or we think it's fraudulent, going back to what Eric was saying about ABOG certification, right? It's misinformation to say that you can reverse an abortion. So that's what we're seeing, and by the grace of God, in New York, it's the Western District of New York, the district court said, yeah, that's a violation of these pregnancy resource centers' free speech rights. And that's up on appeal now, so we'll see how that goes. But that's the kind of fight that we're fighting across the United States when it comes to these really, really vital ministries in their communities that are just trying to give support to women and men who are facing unplanned pregnancies, and they want to give them that option. If Letitia James had her way, then we know of one baby that probably wouldn't even be alive right now. It's pretty incredible. If you want to look at the complaint in that case, there is an incredible story about one woman who didn't want to go through with her abortion, and through the abortion pill rescue network was able to find a practitioner who gave her the progesterone and saved her baby's life. So it's incredible information that needs to be out there, and these pregnancy resource centers just want to be able to share it with women.
So I just add on a little bit about the Sage Publications issue and the reason that this is so problematic. That publication, when you have a publication, they control the entire process of the publication. They get to decide whether to publish something, and they do a double-blind peer review. Double-blind peer review means they've got a panel of people that they get to determine are qualified to review the science, the study, to see whether it actually does what it says it does, all the evidence is correct, all that stuff. They choose them, and the people, it's double blind because the person reviewing it doesn't know who wrote it. They don't know who the author is. The author doesn't know the person reviewing it. It's double blind. There is anonymity. So you're not going to be prejudiced by who it is. They chose the people that reviewed that. They went through the process. It's the gold standard. A double blind, peer-reviewed, published study is the gold standard, and they controlled the entire process. It was published for 3 years. Nobody said anything about any of that stuff until FDA came up and some rando professor writes in and is like, hey, I think there's some problems with this. And they're like, oh, you're right. We need to look at this, right? And then they retract it right before, I think it was right before the reply one of the filings pretty close in the FDA case. So they could say, that's now a retracted study that's cited in the case, right? It was completely ideological in many ways, right? So you want to think about that, right?
I believe in the Supreme Court argument, an oral argument, Justice Jackson actually noted that too. Was it relied on retracted studies? I'm like, well, there it is. That's what, well, now, I don't know the intent behind it, but
we can't say the intent, but the fact is, there's a reason, right? It came at that time. Right, and when you look at that, I mean, I think those are the issues that you want to look at and say, hey, why are they doing it? What's the timing behind it? Right. So, I mean, they obviously they've said here's the reason, and they've stated that we don't agree with those reasons, but the timing really shows that.